Hey, howdy, everyone. Welcome to the ComicBase live stream. I'm your host, Pete Bickford, and for the next hour or so, we'll be talking about, well, all things comic and comic-based related, but in particular, answering a lot of viewer mail that people have sent in, different weird questions. Gonna be also be talking about some latest comic-based news, some cool things been happening there. I think you guys might dig, and other type of stuff. And then at the very end of the show, we're going to be talking about the very sad case of Ed Piskor. So stick around for that, and thank you everyone who came. So before we get started, I want to say hi to the folks out here. Richard Scott sends his regrets, which you gotta love. Fan loyalty like that, where like you got a guy who won't be able to be on the stream and still sends regrets. I can throw dinner parties and people don't RSVP like that. So thank you so much for that, Richard. Jet City Comics is here from the Pacific Northwest. Mike Beam also from PNW, and it looks like everyone's weather is just crazy. Out here in I'm gonna say in around Nashville, I think like everyone else had just absolutely torrential stuff going on, but then vastly between that and the beautiful blue sky I'm looking out my window and seeing right now, which by the way I forgot to put on my lights now, so the lighting is actually so good I forgot about it, but anyway, hey, so it goes. Our wrench is in the house, Mr. Gregory Hecht. Also from South New Jersey here, Mike Beam says, I'm not, but my wife is going to New Orleans for a nursing conference. Excellent. Okay, cool. And Oro Viejo is in the house from out in Minneapolis. And everyone's talking about eclipses. So far as I could tell on the path of the totality, it's a lot of people are canceling plans that were planning on seeing it because there's going to be cloud cover, and it's a bummer. I hope you guys can catch it, and if you do, it's pretty darn neat if you catch the totality. If you can't quite catch the whole thing, then it's just kind of gets dark in the middle of the day, and that's interesting but not that fantastic. But an actual total eclipse is pretty dang cool if you can see it. So if it happens at night, not so interesting, but so it goes. Yes, Greg has this. If you can't get to the path of totality, at least break out your collection of Eclipse comics. You could do a lot worse. By the way, before we get into the show too heavily, I gotta say I got a big box of comic books, which is not uncommon for me on a Wednesday before the show. It's basically I'm looking at last week's comics that were processed into the updates, sent over to me for adding to the inventory. And I gotta say, usually I look at these big boxes like, ugh, more work. But I started opening the ones up today, and it's like, holy cow, this is fantastic stuff. I mean, look at the comics that came out this week. I mean, All-Star Comics, Batman, Vengeance of Bane, Batman. I mean, Detective Comics. Green Lantern, we got some other more contemporary things that are a bit more like the things that we're used to seeing, new Hellblazer. Then another major Detective Comics here, Batman #1. I mean, come on, this thing's gonna be worth a fortune. More classic Batman, All American Comics. I mean, this has got to be the best week in comics that has ever happened for DC fans. And of course, what we're really seeing here is these are all facsimile editions, or almost all of them are. But the ones that I gotta say, really put a smile on my face, with the exception of like maybe one Hellblazer, were all things that were published between 30 and like 60 years ago. But fantastic that they're doing this again. This is actually the absolute opposite of the variant thing, and I couldn't be happier about what they're doing here. Is they're taking things that people like, and going back in time to like if I want to get my hands on this one, even just to read it, and what were my options? I could shell out like $1 jillion for a hardcover recolorized edition, which lacks all the cool original ads and things like that. I could spend about $1 bajillion and try to lay my hands on an authentic copy of it, in which case I'd be terrified to actually read it. Or for, I believe, was it $5.99 or $6.99, I can have it page for page the way it was in 1939, 38, I think, but right there and get it in all its glory. And I'm like, that is the deal of the century. I'm so excited to see some of these reprints coming back. And honestly, to the extent that you could possibly do it, comic companies, please, Marvel, DC, hell, even Image, I would love it if you could keep your key issues in perpetual stock. Go ahead and mark them up in different colors or different brands or things like that, so that we still keep the value if we actually do have the Batman #1, so you can tell it apart. But I'm looking at my local comic shop over here, and overwhelmingly, the shelf space these days is starting to go towards these reprint editions. People are a lot more excited to lay out money for these than they are for these 73rd Spider Gwen series, or what up to the 13th series of Punisher. Yeah, no, I this is a trend I absolutely applaud. It takes the best part of comics and brings it back full force. I mean, it makes you want to read more of this kind of stuff. So I mean, yeah, no, bring back. You guys have had 60, 70 years of fantastic history. Bring back the best stuff and keep it out there for people. Make some new fans at an affordable price. This is so much better than taking the latest crap and making 700 covers of it with variants. I mean, guys, this is the right move. The variant thing is the wrong move. So anyway, I applaud you guys for doing that. Thank you, comic cover companies. Keep it coming. And honestly, and if you can make the new comics worth being excited about in 10, 20 years from now, that'd be even better. So we'll take it from there. Let's see here. Brian Stewart says, I should be filing my 9 short box into the larger overall pop culture, but no, I'm with Pete. What those facsimiles are modern, facsimiles are modern age size, not golden age size though, right? Yeah, they are. Realistically, it does fit into a modern age bag, but even with the oldest ones, you're talking about, what is it, 3/8 of an inch, trim size difference. It's not, you're not compromising anything. The one thing I do hope that they don't do, and I'll show an example of it done the wrong way. I was super excited to get the Red Sonja omnibus over here, because those early Red Sonja issues from Conan and the first Marvel feature magazines, and the original Red Sonja one with Frank Thorne, those were fantastic sword and sorcery type things. But I'm glad that they reprinted them. What I am not glad about is the recoloring. I don't know how badly you guys can see that one, but they amped up the color so hot on this one that it just comes off really artificially. It's almost as bad as some of the Classics Illustrated recolored reprints, where it takes you out of the experience. I mean, I do want a nostalgic experience when I'm reading these omnibuses. I mean, go ahead and give me better paper, give me a clearer reproduction than the copy I probably got. I don't mind that. You don't need to dull down the page whiteness or anything for me, but take the coloring back a notch. You don't need to go have everything be blaze fire engine red and everything else. It's just wheel it back just a bit, guys. That's the wrong way to do reprints, and I would almost buy this book again if it were just colored a little bit more faithfully to the originals, because it just looks bad. But anyway, but the reprint facsimile editions that both Marvel and DC have been putting out, I'm really excited to see those, honestly. And again, who wouldn't? Given choice between the latest issue of the 14th Spider-Man spin-off series, or rereading the first appearance of Green Goblin, or the first appearance of Punisher, or whatever else, who wouldn't spend their $4 or $6 to do the latter as opposed to the former? So yeah, you got to make good stories, guys. That's the real way to keep this going. But as far as getting the fan interest back in the game, please, for the love of God, do this, as opposed to just printing me the same story under 500 different covers. And by the way, not cool to do that. If you're gonna do variants of this stuff, you don't need to do variants of the variant, which some people are doing, and that's like bad habits dying hard. All right. Other things going on. Let me see here. Greg says, yes, Dynamite's Red Sonja Omnibus reuses the files from those horrid TPB reprints they did some years back. Shame. Yeah, it absolutely is. Somebody with a little bit more artistic sensibility, I wish they'd come back there and rethink of the coloring. It doesn't take much. But better the recoloring and the switch to Brian's saying here, saying better the recoloring and the switch to glossy paper versus the original newsprint. I agree. Everything does not have to pop. Yeah. All right. So anyway, let's get onto it. So I do have a decent amount of news today. First of all, encoded in this quick little thing where I was flying them past the camera here, and I don't know how well it's going to focus in, pretty badly, but we have done, and now the lost the focus on me. This is great. All right, let's try this again. All right, can you autofocus on the label? We got that? Okay, that looks pretty sharp right now. All right, so take a quick look at that label. This is the ID label here, and you might notice compared to your copy of the same sort of thing, just a few things that are different. And one of them is the type is significantly larger now. We have redone in the latest version of ComicBase, this is build 1188 if you guys are keeping score, redone all the ID labels and revisit a number of other things to try to make the titles, which seem like they're getting longer and longer and longer, more visible, even on the small constrained space of a label. So we basically fought for every tenth of an inch we could get out of the whole thing in order to be able to show the critical information as big as we possibly can. The most critical thing, on an ID label, of course, is what is the name of the thing you're printing. And so when you're getting to these longer titles, especially when you're talking about the New Adventures of Batman and Robin, third series, number 33, variation B, that can get stupid. But it's actually big enough now that when you get to the very small sizes, it will actually word wrap along the top. And on the smaller labels, if you get something like just like Daredevil 5th series, it's at a font size that my grandmother could read if my grandmother was still with us. But my mother, if she could read that one without her glasses now, and that's, I think, a really good thing. Other things that are different in Build 1188. Remember a couple shows ago where we were showing off some different quick reports and things like that you could do, and we would come up with these queries that like, show me all the comics we've got, with a cover price greater than $10 or something, and it would try to put comics with cover price greater than $10 report as the name of the report. And because the report was so lengthy there, it would actually start overwriting other parts of the header, where your name would go. That's been fixed up. That has now got room to also go multiple lines now, as well as we've expanded the pricing, the width of the price field in the quick reports, so that if you're saying, show me all the comics in my collection worth more than $500, and if you happen to have an Action Comics #1 worth in the millions, they can actually display all the digits without truncating now. And again, if your biggest problem in the world was that my $1 million comics were truncating because they didn't have enough space on the quick report to display the digit, well, my heart does go out to you, because obviously we changed it, but it is a high-class problem to have, you got to say. But anyway, hopefully none of us will have that problem anymore. So that is all in Build 1188. We fixed another couple weird little issues. One of them, if you ever got a little error saying when you first installed the program was having trouble drawing a form, that's no more, and so forth. But check it out, a lot of little tweaks, and the way to get it is to go in ComicBase, and if you go to Setup and then Preferences and tell it to check for interim releases. If you check that box, then it will show you the builds that are not the main canonical builds, the ones that we force everyone to do, but it'll show you all the little things we're doing all the time to make the program better, and not a bad thing to do. You also can just go ahead, if you go to comicbase.com, go to My Account Registrations, and just download the program again. It will update to the very latest version no matter what you've got. It won't affect your data, and you'll always have the very latest thing we've got. So give that a go, and hopefully we'll take it from there. All right, so other things that are going on in life. All right, announcement, finally. It took some time, but we are back in stock with our wireless scanners. Those come into us straight from the supplier out in the Pacific Rim. So we had to do lots of crazy things to get the new supplies sent over to us as fast as we did, but they are back in stock. So if you got scooped out beforehand and were not able to grab a wireless scanner, please, by all means, feel free to order those now. They're available on the site. And I think, the last major announcement is we have officially, as they say, forked the build. So we are now, except for bug fix or something urgent that comes up, we are now officially done with the development cycle on ComicBase 2024. We're officially concentrating our main efforts on the next thing. So if you'd like to be part of the next thing, if you haven't sent me a note yet, please send a note to, and I'll put it up on the show here, P. Bickford at human-computing.com. If you'd like to be part of the team effort, get in on the pre-release stuff as we're building it, see the new things as we're going, and be part of the process of commenting live. It's something that's been very successful for us in the past, inviting you guys in behind the wire to see how the sausage is made. You guys have helped a lot. And once again, if you'd like to be part of the process, send me a note. Please also include your user ID and your email if it's not incredibly obvious, especially if you use something different than the email you're sending me from, and what version of ComicBase you're using right now. Because if you're part of the team, we give you a corresponding serial number for the new version, and we're starting to fire that effort up. It'll probably be going in full blast next week, but for us internally, we officially started working on the next one. The next one, by the way, the code name is Magic Castle, and it's going to be a number of months before it comes out for the real thing, but the adventure has begun for us. All right. With that said, let me move myself back in frame just a little bit more. All right. Yeah. Little more pictures of robots in the background, a little less of my laser printer. So yes, good to keep these things classy. All right. Let's get to it, and switching over to the other computer here. Viewer questions. Let me. Oh yes, and Greg says I hear Dodger in the background. Yes, because someone is delivering us something, and my dog, like all dogs, thinks that he is a commando, elite security guard, SWAT member, whatever else, but he is there to defend the house against all threats, whether they're ninjas, terrorists, rapists, muggers, or UPS drivers. And so far, he has a perfect record of never letting any but the latter through. So he's very fierce that way. All right, so let's get into it. Let's go switch to the other computer here. How do we do this? I think I remember this. It is it is that one. Boom. Okay, cool. And let's switch the mouse over there. Yes, our demo computer. The new one is called Dave. Is back in the house. Dave the Minion here. All right, so the first question came up, and I'm going to leave names off all these ones here. These are all actual legitimate viewer questions, restated slightly for clarity. But and by the way, if you guys have your own questions you'd like to put in on the show, please go ahead and put them in at ComicBase TV in the chat, and I will hit as many of those as possible. And I'm going to prioritize the people who are here in the show even more than the people who send stuff ahead of time. So take that. Anyway, first question came. This is, hey, I've got my subscription has been renewed, but I'm still getting renewal messages. What's going on? And with a lot of question marks after it. In this particular case, it could be a couple of things. So if you've gone to comicbase.com, you've looked under my account and registrations, you see that you've got a new currently available subscription, and it's renewed, it's green, under the date there, then you will not be getting renewals unless you're running either the wrong version of the software or you're running software that's tied to a different serial number. So let's take either case, right? So in this guy's particular case, I believe he was still running ComicBase 2023. He had renewed ComicBase 2024 and had not downloaded the software yet. So that was his main problem. The main thing all you got to do is whenever you are checking for new versions of anything, come up here under the internet menu, just say check for updates. And if there's a new update to be had, especially if there's a new program version, it's going to say, hey, there's welcome to ComicBase and then 2024, and here's all the great things about it. Click here to update. Click there to update. It'll download the installer. It'll run it right afterwards, and you'll be good to go. So, I mean, if you're at the top of your screen, it says ComicBase 2023 still, you got to fix that. Let me go ahead and pull up the magnifier so I can make certain things bigger as I go here. So yes, if the top of the screen still it says ComicBase 2023, not 2024, download ComicBase 2024. It's part of your subscription. You already paid for it, so just go ahead and download it. Double click to run it, and it should uninstall 2023 if things go right, and then you will not get that message if that was where your problem was coming from. Now, another thing that can happen, it's kind of weird. It doesn't happen much, but there are times through various weird things. Like the most common one is that you had, like, say, the Pro, and then you upgrade to the Archive. But depending on when the new version came out, you might have been issued a new Pro and a new Archive serial number or something like that. But it is possible to actually have two serial numbers listed under your account, one of for the same product. Depending on some various strange conditions, if you hit things exactly right or exactly wrong, depending on how you think about it. So if you go under comicbase.com, go under my account and then registrations, and if you say that you've got ComicBase 2024 Archive Edition, but you have two serial numbers there, and one's expired and one isn't, it's possible the copy of the software you're running is tied to the wrong one. If so, all you got to do is go up here under the in ComicBase, go to About ComicBase. Let me go ahead and make this bigger so you can see it. Go Help and then About ComicBase. And then it'll show your registration number down here. If that serial number you've got right down here isn't the one that isn't expired, if it's tied to the one that is expired, click on here on Edit Registration. It'll ask you for your name, your company if you want, and what the new serial number is. Put the serial number for the other copy in. So the serial number you've got, if you have two, and again, this isn't very common, but it can happen. Put in the serial number for the unexpired one, hit register. It will exit the program when you're done, and everything will be good to go, and you won't have any problems after that. So that should take care of that. Okay, that was question number 1. Let me just double check. There's a chat here. Okay, sorry. I'm just saying. Brian says, I wish comics would go back to being on newsprint. It's different from the newsprint from the 70s. Should also help with lowering the cost of comics. Yeah, I wonder about that. It was a big switch. It was basically around the time when comics were either 50 or 60 cents back in the 80s, where some of the independent guys first made the switch from newsprint to better quality paper, essentially gloss, magazine stock. And at the time, they used it also as an excuse to say, hey, well, we're giving you much better quality paper, and so our comics cost $1.25 as opposed to the 50, 60 cents you're paying through the mainstream guys. Realistically, I suspect the underlying economics had a lot more to do with the fact that when Marvel was at the time pushing out a new issue of Spider-Man, they were selling 300,000 copies of it. And if you were pushing a new copy of Nexus or something like that, on the new Mando paper or whatever it was, or Star Slayer or something, you were going to sell, I don't know, 10,000 copies. So being able to move the price point up, I think the paper, it gave a little bit of justification for that. But I think if the numbers you're talking about there, if it moved the underlying cost more than 5-10 cents a book up, I'd be shocked. But that being said, there is a lot to be said for glossy paper as opposed to newsprint. One thing that you never think about, but if you ever print it out on a laser printer, anything with very small type on it, you realize that paper has resolution, just like your computer screen does. There's based on how smooth the paper is, it controls how fine the dots of ink can be that are attached to it, whether it's inkjet or laser. And so if you take like a regular piece of paper and you print something that's in 5-point type, and you take a piece of gloss paper and you print something at 5-point type, the gloss piece of paper is going to be far, far more legible than the plain paper one. And the same thing applies to newsprint. Newsprint is very rough fibered, for like a better word. Anyone who gets involved with paper manufacture can probably tell me the right word for it. But because it's very chunky and rough, it can't take the ink in as detailed a way as better quality paper can. And honestly, I think that's worth something. I mean, I think if you look at how it was originally drawn and how it gets through the process, and you can really appreciate the artist's work on the whole thing, I think it comes off better if you print on decent stuff. That being said, you don't need to super exaggerate the colors and everything else like that. So take it for what's worth. Let's see here. Wow. Okay. A lot of comments on this one. Brian says, I have to dig somewhere. IDW Boom Vault is using a non-matte glossy. It seems to me like a new newsprint. Actually prefer it. No glare, less fingerprints. Greg says, even though most of today's comics are on glossy paper, is still very cheap. Yeah, the thin paper. Newspaper is relative to the old days more expensive than it used to be. Yeah, it's funny. Also, I hear from I've got a friend who puts out a magazine in Santa Cruz, and the prices I'm hearing that he's paying for paper like on the industrial level, like when they're loading in the stuff with the forklift to load on the printers, that stuff has, I think, like tripled from what it was just a little while ago. All right, and some more to talk about newsprint. I'm going to push on from that. Okay, moving on. All right, next question says, hey, I'm got Sidekick. It's set to update, but my database never gets updated. What's up? All right, and in this particular case, And let's go ahead and first of all show the problem, and then we'll talk about it a little bit. So let's go over here. And first of all, Sidekick, for those of y'all who don't know, and in this case, because I just installed the program, Sidekick's not running. Sidekick is a little program, comes with ComicBase, and it's meant to run down at the little bottom left-hand corner here, right down here, and take care of all the futzy stuff. Now, one thing you'll notice I launched it I launched it manually, and the first thing it did is said, "Hey, I need a database." Bright red letters we just talked about. Please choose at least one database to use. Now, if you were launching ComicBase, originally, it would by default, just when it makes your first database, it's also going to say, "Hey, can I have Sidekick manage this for you?" And it would automatically add that database to your thing. All right, in which case it would do that automatically. But in this guy's case, Sidekick, again, it's a little program. It runs all the time, and especially when ComicBase isn't running. And what it's meant to do is all the stuff that's really dull. One of those things is to download your content updates and post your stuff online and back up your software to the cloud and things like that. But it needs to know what databases it should even concern itself with, and it does that in the settings, Sidekick settings. It's the little cog on the main screen, and right on the main tab there, it'll have a list of databases. You can add to it by hitting the green plus. You can get rid of things by highlighting them and hitting the little orange minus. But you need to tell it what databases to play with, because if you don't tell it to play with anything in particular, it will not do anything at all. It will just sit there waiting for you to add a database to it so it knows what to manage. But in this guy's particular case, what he had done is he was working out of a database called, I won't use real names here, but it was like called Bob's database. But Sidekick was set up to manage the default database, ComicBase database. So if you're going to have a different database that you want Sidekick to manage for you, you need to add it to the list. So just go ahead and go over there, get rid of any databases that aren't really your database. So like, he was using the default database here, ComicBase database, you see down here, located in my, the Pete Bickford Documents Human Computing ComicBase Databases folder. ComicBase Database is the name of the default database that comes with ComicBase. If you've called your database something else, or if you have it located someplace else, you got to tell Sidekick where it is. So just go ahead and click that plus button, steer over to the database you want to manage. Go ahead and double click on the database in question, or click on it and then hit open. It'll get added to the list, and at that point you're good to go. Just hit save, and then that'll be the one that appears in the list up there, and it's the one that'll get updated as per the schedule. Now, what do I mean the schedule? Back up here under the settings for Sidekick, it's got a schedule it runs at, and by default it checks for updates every day at 11 at night. It doesn't check or post sales unless you want it to do that. You have to set that manually to run at a certain point. It'll save your database to the cloud weekly. That's also, by the way, at the same time it's going to sync up your data with the mobile app. You can do this more frequently if you want. You can have it do it daily, monthly, whatever you want. And it'll compact the database weekly. This is all by default. And it tries to do this stuff by default in the middle of the night, 11 o'clock at night. And so the ideal case for Sidekick is that, at least once in a while you leave your machine on and with ComicBase closed, because some of these things it can't do. And it says it right down at the bottom here. Some functions are unavailable when ComicBase is running. To enable these functions, close ComicBase. If I were to close ComicBase right now, you would see that all these disabled buttons down here would light up, because suddenly it'd be possible to do this. You can't have two different programs, ComicBase and Sidekick, trying to update the database at the same time. It leads to bad things. So it tries to watch out for those kind of conflicts. And so you do need to close ComicBase itself once in a while to let Sidekick do its thing, if you want Sidekick to be able to do its thing. Other than that, you also can do all these functions with the exception of saving to the cloud right from within ComicBase itself. So if you prefer to update your data in ComicBase, just go under Internet and say Internet, check for updates. If there's new content update, you can download yourself. You'll be waiting a few minutes. It's not a big deal, but and that's the idea. Is that's why you want Sidekick around to do it in the middle of the night, because that way you're not waiting around for anything. There's one special function that's only Sidekick can do, and that's to save to the cloud. Mostly because it's a big, long process that has to happen with ComicBase closed in order to have the database free, and so that's why ComicBase itself can't do it, but Sidekick will happily do it for you. All right, that is the story on that one. And let me go back to the main thing and see if there's any other. Nope, we are good on that one. Let's go to the next question. I'm sorry, let me switch my mouse to the other machine so I can scroll. All right. Next question comes in. Hey, I've got a dialogue that is being clipped by the program. I can't see the whole thing. What's going on? What do I do? All right. In this particular case, looking into it, it was, we call it the select issues dialogue. Let me see if I can pull up Sidekick and show it. Um, this is the dialogue that appears when I go to something like I want to go to a report. Whoops, not. Let's say I want to go to, let's say I want to print labels. And I want to say, okay, let's go to, let's say, like, yeah, I want identification labels. Now, as we said in the last round of tips, there's a number of ways to get your labels printed. I actually prefer the one where you choose the labels ahead of time and then say, what do you want to do with them? And you say print. But you also can go in and say, well, I want to print labels. And then the question then becomes, which labels did you want? Now you can do it by series, or you can say, hey, I just want these individual items, at which point you would do things like typing, Batman, and Robin. And then you'd get this dialog here, and you would choose one or more of these ones right down here. Whoops. Sorry. You choose one or more of the ones down here. You'd say add, and it would add them to the list, and keep on going until you're done. And you wind up with a big list of here's all the ones you wanted to print, which again, you could then say, and I didn't really want 14, 15, and that one right there, so get rid of those. And anyway, when you're all done, you've got a list of things you wanted to choose, print. I chose 7 of them here, and if I said print ID labels for it, I'd get, boom, a bunch of ID labels. Anyway, that dialogue that was in between, where I had to steer between the titles and then choose the items, that was called the selected items thing. And for this particular guy, it was running off the screen for him. So when he would go ahead and say, let's choose a new title, like Robin, this whole thing right here would be off his screen, and so he couldn't see it all, and he was in trouble. He couldn't hit the add button because he couldn't see it. So what's going on with that? Now, there's a couple things. Almost all the dialogues in ComicBase can be, to the extent that it makes any sense at all, you can resize them. They'll shift around with you as you go. They will. You can drag them around your screen. You can put, make them bigger, smaller, put them on the screen, off the screen, and so forth. And you want to be able to use your screen space, the best you can, whatever makes sense for you. If somehow you've got a very small screen, it is possible to get into a situation where I made this window really, really, really big, and I somehow either moved it halfway off the screen so I can barely even see it. When it opens down here, in which case, when we open it next time, we try to pop it front and center, but depending on how your screens are laid out, we're not always successful. Or your screen geometry can change in other various and exciting ways that make it so that you had a screen size that can't quite be displayed. Now, if it's something normal, like I'd set the window to be 800 pixels wide by 800 pixels tall, and I just open it up on a 600 pixel tall screen. Typically, something like that, we're going to shrink the thing down automatically, and you'll be able to fix it. The thing that kind of does us in a little bit is Windows has really crummy, they call it form scaling. What the heck is that? Well, Windows wants to be visible by a lot of different people with a lot of different size monitors, but more importantly, a lot of different ability to read small things. And so if you click up here under, right click and choose display settings, you'll get to the display settings. And one of the most important ones you've got down here is you've got the display resolution, how big your screen is. Right now I'm opening it on a 1920 by 1080 screen. I could say, no, make it, I could say make it be smaller or larger, in which case, I could set my screen as if it was, a different size. Or I also can do a thing called scaling, where I can say, make everything around here 150% of what it would normally be, at which point everything just got very big. But what's also happened here is I suddenly can't see nearly as much stuff as I could before, because all the things that are there suddenly got much larger. You can get into a situation where if you've got your scale set really strangely, like you've got it 200, 300%, but your resolution is not, much changed, that you might have ComicBase kind of stuck in a way where it can't squish all the stuff on the screen anymore. In which case, you kind of unfortunately have to make a choice. You either need to get a bigger monitor, or you need to cut your scale back a bit. You can't have it magnifying everything times 300% on a monitor that barely supports ComicBase to start with, because you've used up all the pixels on something else. So I'd say do check that. That is something that, from the screenshots this guy sent in, looked like that was probably what was doing him in. But then the last thing I would say, actually the second last thing I'd say, the very first thing I would say on any technical problem you might ever have with ComicBase is, number one, download the latest version. It is possible, because we're always building new versions of ComicBase. We talked about a number of things we just did with ComicBase right at the top of the show. It is possible that there was some little tweaky thing we fixed 3.5 months ago that was a little bit off for a day or two, which somehow that's the version you downloaded. But if that's not the current version, even if it's been fixed, you didn't necessarily get the fix if you didn't download, if you didn't check for updates. So do go up here under setup, go to preferences, and especially if it's a tweaky little thing, like the kind of thing that wouldn't have forced us to normally push an update to everybody. But make sure you've got that check for interim updates chosen out here if you want to get all the very latest stuff. And because then if you do that, if there's an update which isn't of such significance that we would force it on everyone, you'll get told about those anyway. So do check that and see if there isn't a more recent version of the program anytime you have any kind of technical problems. Because the very first thing our techs are going to ask you is, well, what version of the program are you using? And if it's not the very latest, the very first thing we'll tell you to try is we'll download the latest and see if your problem goes away. Because if it does, then we're good. We don't need to worry about it. But all right. So with all that said, and let's say it's a standard thing, you've got the very latest version. And by the way to check what version you've got, go up under here, say help about ComicBase. And when we say what version of the program have you got, we're asking for this number right here, 24.0.0.1188. That is the very latest one. It was created, I think, 11 o'clock this morning. But if you've got the very latest one right there, well, then something else has gone on with your machine. We're going to have you check your display settings in this case. And then the very last thing you can do is, if you ever want to reset all of your window positions on the screen, let's say that you had the window saved and it was in a bizarre place, set to a bizarre size, and somehow you can't seem to get it back. If you hold down the Shift key when you launch ComicBase, it will automatically reset all the default window positions. They'll all open at the default size, and they'll be dead center on your screen. And so if you do have some kind of weird window sizing issue in particular, just hold down the Shift key, launch ComicBase, keep it open, keep the Shift key down until the main program launches, and all those kind of positional things should revert back to their normal place. And if that doesn't take care of it for you, give us a call and we'll figure out something else. But I think between all that stuff here, I think this guy was sorted out, because I don't think we've heard back from him that there's still trouble. So anyway, hopefully that took care of it. All right. Let's see. Brian says, always get bigger monitor. Can't have too big. Almost not true. 24-inch, 27-inch portrait model, and it has a 32-inch on his desk. The 32 is actually a smidge too big. I'd rather have multiple versus a 54-inch single. Yeah, it's. I think we talked about this last time out. The monitors were getting bigger and bigger, and it was a wonderful trend. For many, many years, until cheap laptops started to take over the consumer market. People like them because you can take them on the road. They're not too much to carry. And if you're just reading, if most of what you do is email and word processing and stuff like that, then web browsing, then they work great. ComicBase is a pretty good program for stressing your system a little bit. If you have a really slow hard drive, man, you're going to know it running a database. And the other thing is, we have a lot of information we're always trying to show, and we're always trying to show it to you in as few screens as possible, because it's the most efficient way to work with it. But that also means that we want to have as much screen space as you can give us. So, running, the biggest database of ComicBase on the planet on a really, really tiny monitor is not a great combination, all things considered. That being said, next version of ComicBase, we will be going to some heroic measures to try to make it work better with very small monitors. By very small, I mean like entry-level spec laptops, 728 pixels tall, 768 pixels tall, the kind of things where you would, we were giving our tips last time, that you might want to be hiding your taskbar just to buy you that extra 40 pixels. But if you look at some of these screens in particular, let's switch over to the, come on, where is the monitor demo? There we go. If you switch over to particularly things like the edit screen right here, the detailed edit, this information right here, very tough to get all of this onto a single monitor. And we even use tabs here to switch between the major types of things you'd want to enter. But we may have to go further than that in order to buy an extra 40, 50 pixels. It's basically everything from about where the UPC is on down. That information, if you've got like the smallest, the lowest end laptop that money can buy, and you're running it, not using any kind of, special scaling to buy you extra space, that information on a very low end laptop is hard to display, and it often gets cut off. But that's why the minimum specs for ComicBase are what they are. But that being said, I think we are probably going to be making quite an effort to be able to make it so the program at least shows you what we need to on these very low end laptops, because yeah, it's the market trend has changed. Things are not always up and to the right in terms of how big your monitors are, and so we want to adjust. All right. Well, with that said, all right, I got one more I want to talk about, and then we're going to talk about Ed Piskor just a bit. A guy says, "Hey, I'm looking at the official handbook of the Marvel Universe, and I'm seeing it listed twice. What's going on?" What was going on with that in particular is, let me switch back to the demo. Once upon a time, Marvel came up with a series of books, and this has been done. It's not just the official handbook of the Marvel Universe. Things like Marvel Preview or DC Connect or the Malibu Sun or other things like that fall into the same kind of category. But what they would do is they would come up with the official handbook of the Marvel Universe, and if you look up here, this thing is comic book sized. It looks like a comic book for all the world, but it doesn't actually contain comic book stuff. And matter of fact, I did the official handbook of the wrong universe. Official handbook of the Marvel Universe. And again, all these things, they look like comic books. The problem is they're not comic books. They were printed in comic book format. They were printed on crummy newsprint paper. They were 7 1/4, 10 1/4 by 7 1/2, or whatever the dimensions of modern comic book are in size. But there's not a single comic story in them, and so as you guys probably know by now, we go by the Guinness. One of our customers is the guy with the Guinness Book of World Records record for the largest comic book collection. And in order to be able to give that award out, the Guinness people need to have a definition for what's a comic book. And one of the things that they largely are going by the same definition that Scott McCloud came up with Understanding Comics, is basically it contains stories told by an innate juxtaposition of pictures and words. So if it's all just if it's a comic book size thing that contains nothing but text, it's like a novelization, not a comic book. If it's a comic book size thing that has nothing but pictures, it's not a comic book. It's at that point be an art book, but we can't call it a comic book, because we very much wanted to be able to, if only just to keep it straight with the Guinness guys, keep the definition straight for what we class as a comic book or a magazine or a newspaper and so forth. We want to keep that straight, so that hey, when someone say I have the world's biggest collection of this, that, the other thing, that our definition isn't going to put him at odds with the Guinness people, if nothing else. But it seemed like a decent way to draw the lines, because ComicBase, as you know, does allow you to have books, comics, magazines, and newspapers. They're all different category areas. They all have different types of data they store and so forth. But in particular, to be a comic book, you need to have that innate juxtaposition of words and pictures. Uh, if you have, again, a book with nothing, it might be pictures of Spider-Man all day long, but if all it is pictures of Spider-Man, then it's probably a book. If it was periodical in nature, so in other words, it gets published on some kind of schedule, at that point, maybe it's a magazine. And then if you've got periodicity, and then of types that are typically daily or similar, daily or weekly, then presume predominantly there to describe news and other such content. At that point, there you're talking about newspapers. Anyway, but the comic book category in particular is one that, back when ComicBase in the old days only had comics, right? We didn't have other media. We didn't have books. We didn't have magazines. Well, then everything that we wanted to track had to be under comics because there was no other type. But when ComicBase 2020 came out and suddenly we were able to differentiate all these types, suddenly a lot of things that were previously comic books, or we called them comic books, got moved into their proper place. So a lot of the art of J. Anacleto, the art of Marvel, the art of the Ultimate Universe, all those kind of portfolio books all got moved into books. If they were periodical in nature, in other words, it's like if it was Fantasy Art Quarterly or something like that, at that point they would get moved into magazines because, again, there's a periodical nature to them. But more importantly, the official handbook of the Marvel Universe, those things got moved into magazines as opposed to comic books. Now, back to this guy's question. He says, hey, I'm seeing this in two different places. What's going on? What happened is he had an old database that had these still listed under his comic books because he was coming in from a very, very old version of ComicBase at this point. And then he's looking at his entries, but then he's also seeing the new place where it belongs. So let's go to the official handbook of the Marvel. Okay, let's go to this one right here. All right. Now, important thing we can do here is, as you're typing down there, now in his case, he was seeing these two entries for the same one. But if you look down at the bottom here, right where it says Marvel 1983 to 84, you see it right in brackets there. It says the type of thing it is. He had one that said comics. Those were the ones from his old database that were carried over. And he had one that said magazine, which is where it belongs now. It's its new official classification. What you should do if you are caught in that situation and you have multiple entries for these things, you'll see if it has the same name that it will have a different type. And what you want to do is you want to figure out what's the official type. And it's pretty obvious because we'll actually give that to you in the update report every time you download content. We'll say, you have certain things that we don't recognize. The ones that we don't recognize are the ones that are in the wrong place. What you want to do is go to those ones on, the ones that were in the comics title or whatever else. And in that case, you want to highlight, you either want to highlight, the issues. I'm sorry, you don't want to highlight that, but you want to go to the ones that are the wrong ones. In his case, you want to go to the official handbook of the Marvel Universe that was the comic one, and then go under the edit menu here and say change series media type. So I show that again. So again, imagine that I'm on the old official handbook of the Marvel Universe ones that was mislisted as being a comic book. Go to that one, say change series media type, and if you change it, you won't have the ability to change it to comic books. You'll see that one's grayed out because that's the one you're on. If you change it to magazines, it will then say, hey, there already is a magazine called Official Handbook of the Marvel Universe. Do you want me to transfer your data over to that one? At which point, it will automatically transfer over your entries, your inventory data into its right place. It'll add to any inventory that was there already. And more importantly, it'll then delete the bogus one. And next time you update, you see that list of mismatched titles, it will not list your official handbook of the Marvel Universe under comics anymore because they are now where they belong, under magazines. All right, so that was the answer to that question. Hopefully that helps somebody else out, and we'll take it from there. All right, so with all that said, I want to spend just a little time talking about something really, really sad. As a matter of fact, let me go ahead and pull this up. Sorry, I want to go to not to series and stock. Let's go to Hip Hop Family Tree. All right, so a lot of you guys will know a guy named Ed Piskor. He is a indie comics artist. He got to start drawing American Splendor. That's Harvey Pikar's magazine. You got to start working on there. A lot of kind of adult. By adult, I mean like something an adult could read, not like porn. But kind of like alt indie kind of stuff like there. There's a really good underground of this in the comics industry. It gets no love from the major publishers, but it's where you take the comic art form and you try to stretch it in ways that are interesting. And some of the places that this has been done really interestingly are in books like American Splendor, or I mean, you name it, almost anything that Drawn and Quarterly ever published, or Fantagraphics, or things like that. Um, One of the things that projects that came along in 2015 was called Hip Hop Family Tree. Ed Piskor has a real love. He grew up in Pittsburgh, real love of hip hop. And he thought, look, I'm going to make a nonfiction thing, which basically traces the history of hip hop through all the different eras it went through. Points out that the different bands, how they go. You see all this stuff is a lot of the comic covers are like modeled on famous covers you see from like regular superhero comic books. But he's talking about this art form that he just fell in love with, and he had a very successful series as this one. It ran for a number of issues. It got collected into an omnibus. He got noticed from this and in other work that he's done. He eventually got invited to do work for Marvel in more conventional stuff, like X-Men Grand Designs, which was a retelling of the X-Men's history, like the big history of the X-Men. A little bit of reinterpretation on it, but decent work. Really interesting. And I'm going to say, it's the kind of thing that will interest a guy who's not a kid anymore, that's still reading comic books, because you sit there and say, hey, what could this art form do? I mean, just it could be snarky, it could be offbeat, it could be any number of other things, but you can talk about things that aren't just Hulk smash and bam pow, all the other stuff that causes. I mean, if comic books are caught there, then it's a lot of people just leave them behind when they get to be 12. But I mean, there's a whole other reason to read comic books or to love the art form as you get older, but it relies on, again, more adult storytelling. So Ed was a guy who was very successful in this. And up until a couple weeks ago, he was looking forward to, he was going to be featured in an art show out in Pittsburgh. He was being honored with that. He had a book deal with Abrams Comic Arts. I believe something like a $75K deal just for the Hip Hop Family Tree omnibus getting republished. And things were going along pretty well for him. And then he basically got, I don't know if you called Me Too'd, kind of, sort of. But basically a gal that had liked his work when she was 17 years old, who had sent him Instagram texts, direct messages saying, hey, I really dig this, blah, blah, blah. And he said, oh, yeah, I'm really, honored by this. And then, he struck up, kind of a, I don't know, relationship of sorts, but, friendship, passing acquaintance, whatever the thing is. But it was basically a little mutual admiration society. She was an artist, he was an artist. And they were, lots of DMs back and forth about how much, they loved each other's work, blah, 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 blah. Anyway, she's now 21, and for reasons, I'm sure there were reasons, open up and just absolutely let him have it a couple of weeks ago, and basically said, oh my God, this guy was totally a creeper, and here's all the horrible stuff. He was inviting me to stay at his place, he was doing blah blah blah, and basically just completely slammed on him to death. And that's harsh stuff. And if I'm reading it honestly, I'd be like, okay, yeah, were they, this was during COVID, were people lonely and probably pushing things too far? Yeah, probably. He was 40 at the time. She was 17. Is that great? Nah, not at all. Was there anything that was explicitly sexual in any of it? No. She interpreted it, I'll put it this way. Her 21-year-old self interpreted the stuff as sexual. But when she actually showing the DMs back and forth, it was more or less just like, hey, I really like your stuff, that kind of stuff. But rather than get into the back and forth on that one too much, what I'm going to say is I'm going to encourage people to have a look at Robert Meyer Burnett's blog on it. He did a pretty fair dump of just what was said about, exactly by different things, and then what came out back and forth of the whole thing. Do check out Robert Meyer Burnett's latest thing. It's about an hour long, but it's worth it. I'll link it in the show notes. Um, Anyway, this got all summed up in a big news article, I think on the 25th, by a comics journalism thing. And as a result of the heat on this one, and also another woman who strangely had the same first name, who he had, was an adult, but came back and said, "Yeah, he's a real creep, and he, did something inappropriate with me too." But they'd had a relationship. But anyway, there was kind of a pile on, and suddenly everyone that Ed knew in the industry didn't want to know him anymore. And suddenly he is, he went from being this underground cool guy with a cool, YouTube show called was it Kayfabe, comic artist Kayfabe, something like that. But cool popular guy on the snarky underground thing. Suddenly he's the awful adult creeper, and everyone wants to disassociate and not be around him. His art show got pulled, to indefinitely by the city of Pittsburgh. God knows what happened to whatever deals he had and everything. And it's based on one person's side of some stuff. And even I'm looking this as a 56-year-old guy. And if this was my daughter, I'd be like, "Hey man, not really cool. Back off." I mean, that would be my reaction. It's like, you might like my daughter's art. You might, really just be thinking she's pretty hot, whatever the thing is. He was not being, again, it's not like he was sending dick pics, but should he maybe have cooled his jets? Yeah. I mean, look, I will go with inappropriate. Sure. Why not? But that's the proper thing to do if something is doing like that. I'm also going to say it was during COVID, and everyone I know was going out of their minds during COVID. Everyone was absolutely dying of loneliness, and some people probably go further than they could have, would have, should have. Yeah, I'm going to grant a lot of grace on that particular one, because I mean, the whole reason we're doing this show right now is because I'm going out of my mind, just sitting at home working during COVID, and no one's seeing anybody. I'm sitting there thinking, Jesus Christ, I miss people, And so I started a YouTube show where we talk about ComicBase. Anyway, did other people flirt with people they might not have flirted, with otherwise online? Yeah, I'm sure they did. Did anyone break any laws? Did anyone do anything super inappropriate? I'm not going to do that. But the important part is, at the end of the whole day, after the world piled onto him, after his partner in the show said, "Hey, I can't be associated with him anymore," after the ex-girlfriend came out and said, "Oh no, he's a total creep," on April 1st, Ed killed himself. And this, I don't care what you think about what's appropriate, what's inappropriate. How this becomes a death sentence type of thing, I don't have words. The reality is, the situation broke him. It just, he got into a point where he couldn't look forward and see that tomorrow was going to be any better than today, and he decided to end it. And this is insane. I mean, it's just, I have lots and lots and lots of thoughts on this whole thing. I think a lot of the really dark stuff, I think I'd rather save for something like a ComicBase After Dark, where we get in there. But I have seen way too many people basically have a mob ginned up on them over circumstances that no one really knows the inside and out of, other than maybe the two people involved, where suddenly an internet rage mob forms up, and next thing you know, the guy offs himself, or he can't take it, and he pulls the plug on life. If I mean, this is Jacobin crap. We got to stop doing this. I guess I don't have a solution as to how to stop mobs like this from forming up. I mean, one of the things I always get to when I'm looking at any of these things is, well, okay, look, if I want to change a behavior of anyone on anything in particular, I always come down to, like, well, I mean, if I don't have the ability to exert force to make it happen, or I can't influence you, just by convince you, have a really good argument to make you stop doing it. Well, the next question is to say, well, is there some way we can change the incentives of the game so that people don't want to keep on forming these rage mobs all the time? And I think one of the awful things about life today, right now, is that if you're not witty, if you're not talented, if you're not smart, if you're not clever, one way that you can instantly dominate any social interaction you're in right now is you can say, I'm offended. That's it. And this is a skill so easy that I've had 5-year-olds figure this one out. That all they have to do is stomp their feet and say, that's offensive. And then instantly everyone in the room has to stop and say, whoa, oh my God, what am I doing? And everyone backs off. This is such an easy game. Everyone can figure this one out, and everyone has figured this one out. And as a result, there's way, way, way too many people on the planet who figure that, again, I might not be able to argue something with someone because I don't have any facts. I don't have any logic. I don't have any art, any good things on my side. I may not be able to impress you with how dazzling my talent is or anything else like that. But I can instantly own you by saying you did something to offend me. And this is the mechanic at which the rage mob works. Is it forms up a whole bunch of people who are offended, and then at that point, if you want to prove you're one of the good people, well, then you better be on the side of the person who was offended, because God knows that is where virtue lies, is by hanging with the victim. And so if you're the victim, you immediately control the situation, and then, hey, you weren't powerful before and you are now. And so it's like one of these unbeatable dynamics. It's like when I sit there and say, hey, when will all the companies stop printing variant covers? The answer is when it's no longer profitable to print a variant cover. The problem is variant covers are really, really cheap to make. And so it takes almost no additional money to justify making a variant cover. As a result, we're going to get a lot of variant covers. Well, the same mechanics go is as long as I can instantly dominate any social situation by saying, I'm offended, or that person was mean, or that person was a bad person, and I will instantly have clout, regardless of what my standing was beforehand, regardless of whether I approve, regardless of anything else like that. As soon as I do that, we are guaranteed to get this kind of mob thing happening again. So I don't know, man. I wish I knew a magic thing to make it stop, because I don't love this world. I don't love a world where, again, anyone who stomps their feet can ruin someone's life. And make no mistake about any of this one. The people who play this game play it for keeps. It's not enough to say, hey, that was offensive, and then have the person say, oh, I'm sorry, man, I didn't mean to offend you, and back off. That never works. There's never forgiveness for saying, hey, I didn't mean that. I'm so sorry. It was a misunderstanding. I'm backing off now. Can we get along with it anymore? No, it's always I got you now. And now my offendedness now makes you're my bitch. Amongst decent human beings, someone who says, hey, that was inappropriate. That was where else, if you sit there and say, oh, well, I'm sorry, I was out of line, that would end it. But on the internet, it never ends. It does it. As a result, strategically, I think just like everyone's figured out that I can get power just by saying I'm offended, you can, strategically at this point, I think more and more people are figuring out that if someone goes and pulls that game on you, especially if you haven't really done anything wrong, the right move is to tell them to go pound sand. It's not to recognize any validity of their claim whatsoever. And so you get people who you have to play blood sport on both sides. Otherwise, you're just going to be their victim. So it's a wonderful world. It's really a lot of fun, isn't it? I mean, this is a great game we've all learned to play in the year in 2023. And I really wish we'd stop, but I don't know how to make the dynamic of it stop. If anyone has ideas on this one, man, I really want to hear them, because I don't love this world. It's, I think a world that's enjoyable was one where, yeah, you do need to have a little bit of grace to say, yeah, I pushed that a little too far. Yeah, I was a little too flirty when I shouldn't have been. Yeah, that joke was a little off color. And to have people, say, hey, yeah, not cool, but haha, back off and don't do it again. And be able to come back from that. I mean, when I look at young people today, I see a lot of people who are just scared. I mean, everyone is monitoring themselves up, down, sideways, because they're thinking, oh my God, it only takes one person to say I was offended, especially if I can catch that on a text message, do things like that, report you to HR, and your career is over. I mean, it isn't just like, "Hey, man, you shouldn't have done that. Apologize." No, it's like, "No, I'm going to end you. You will. You're about to be an unperson." And in some cases, it becomes literally the case, and that's what it was with Ed. Um, my advice, if you're ever caught in this situation, I mean, if I could have talked to Ed, and it's I didn't know him. I didn't. I only knew his work barely. But if there was someone like Ed in your life, at the point when your friends were running scared, where no matter how much they knew you, no matter how much they might have known you had a good heart, and you were being characterized unfairly, and they weren't willing to stick by you at the end, at the point where they're shivving you in the back, on the whole thing. And it really became a pile on of the people he knew best. And you could tell that's the thing that just really broke his spirit. But I guess the advice I would tell anyone who's caught in that situation is hold on for 1 week. Just make it 1 week, because these SOB rage mobs can't keep their 2-minute hate going for more than a couple of days. I mean, it feels like it'll never end, like it'll never get better, but hold on for 1 week. Turn off your phone, burn your computer. I mean, cut off the internet, but get out of the mess for 1 week. And when you get back, you'll realize that they've mostly taken their rage and they're on to somebody else now, because it's a bunch of SOBs who just need to pile on to someone else to feel valid in their own life. And they'll move on. I mean, I don't remember who the 97 targets of 2024's rage were yet, because I didn't keep a blotter. But you'd need to have something like that to try to remember who I'm supposed to be infuriated at today, because that's the way the internet works. And God knows, if you can't take the internet, get the out. But for God's sake, don't let it destroy you. Anyway, Ed, I'm sorry. I mean, this sucks, and I wish we wouldn't keep doing this. I fear that it feels really damn good to be filled with righteous rage, and to say, I'm sticking up for the little guy, I'm defending the fair maiden, I'm doing whatever the hell thing I'm doing. But righteous rage is a hell of a drug, and we got to learn to let this one go. I mean, one of the things as I get older, I'm I'm learning. I had this discussion with my daughter and my wife a couple days ago. It was over something else. It was, again, some internet rage thing from a couple weeks ago. I've utterly forgotten who it even was. And my response, which I've learned over years of watching people's marriages fall apart, and different people I thought would be going out forever, who suddenly would wake up one day and they're at each other's throats, is I know is no one knows what's inside another person's relationship. I mean, half the time the two people don't know what's in the other person's head. And certainly I have no opinion on anyone else's marriages or long-term relationships or things like that, because that's, they are complicated in ways that go beyond any kind of normal understanding. And unless you're talking about someone stepping over some really bright lines, physical abuse, things like that, unless you're talking about something like that, it's a really good idea to say, I don't know, wasn't there, I'm not part of it. And when you're asked to weigh in on whether this person was, did the other person, mean or whatever else, because you guarantee the person telling you the story, I mean, once you've known about the 10th couple that's gotten a divorce, and you've heard both people's side of it and how radically different they are on basic things, one thing you learn just watching that is, man, oh man, I'm not weighing on any of this. I'm sorry for anyone who's having a bad time. I can definitely manage that much. But as far as who's right, who's wrong, I can't know. It's beyond my ability. And man, would it be great if more of us could say, I don't know, I wasn't there, as opposed to being really, really certain, because this feels a lot like a story that's been running through my head. And because I can make this story look like the story that's running through my head, I know that person's an SOB. And I think that's how the internet works, is it really, we're subject to our own stories. And so I think we ought to try to keep that under wraps as much as possible, but that's a hard lesson that comes with getting older. I don't think it's something that comes naturally at all. I think the thing that comes naturally is to get spun up on rage. And again, righteous indignation is a hell of a drug. But I wish there was a better way. And if you guys have any ideas, I'd love to see it, but damn it, I'm tired of seeing people hunted down like dogs and driven to absolute extinction by rage mobs on the internet. regardless of what the truth is. And half the time we find out, oh yeah, 6 months ago, yeah, that thing that started off the other thing that caused this guy to lose his job and then commit suicide. Yeah, I was just in a dark place then right now, and it wasn't really actually true. Or it was the worst possible reading of the things that were true. God damn it, man. We got to stop doing this. All right. Anyway, that's all I got to say about that for now. Do please check out Robert Meyer Burnett's blog on this one. I will post it in the comments. And you guys have a good one, and we'll see you on the next one. Take care. Bye-bye.